All right, let's get started. Good morning, guys. How's the conference been so far for you? Was the party nice? Awesome. So what we're going to do today, we have, obviously, as you can see, we have a panel here. We're going to talk about all of these new technologies, whether it's on the infrastructure side as Hyperconverged or what Zerto is doing on a software stack, how these new technologies are really enabling some of the simpler and better DR options. That's what we're going to talk about. I have a few slides. It's not a marketing presentation. It's not a sales pitch. Really, the intention of these slides is to get you familiarized with the Pivot 3 platform and terminologies that would be useful in the panel discussion going forward. So with that, let's get started. So really, when you think about the DR and the infrastructure for DR, what is it that you need in a DR infrastructure, right? The first would be, scalability and agility, I think, is a key consideration when you think about DR infrastructure. Inevitably, DR infrastructure is going to grow. Your business is going to grow. The data is going to grow. You want to be able to grow your DR infrastructure flexibly and only when needed. So, grow with your business kind of infrastructure that can simply and easily be scaled to meet the new needs. I think is a key critical consideration for that. Simplicity at scale, right? A lot of infrastructures can scale, but they become exponentially complex as they scale to the larger and larger sizes. So infrastructure needs to be simple at a large scale as well. Modular building blocks really simplify how you scale the infrastructure. And then policy-driven operation. I think I'll explain how our platform enables those policy-driven operations. But primarily in the context of DR, what Zerto does is really here, right? How do you automate your failback, failover kind of operations and minimize the operational overhead of that? The infrastructure, that's the scalability and agility aspect when you think about infrastructure. Next, consistency and dependency. This infrastructure, it's a DR infrastructure, and it's not in focus most of the time. But when you fail over, you want to make sure that it's performing, it's delivering the services with adequate SLAs. So being able to meet performance SLAs for your tier 1 applications, business critical, mission critical applications is critical when you fail over. Predictable scalability, right? Can you scale in a predictable manner? If you can estimate your future growth, data growth, can you estimate simply and predictably how much more infrastructure you want to need 2 years down the line? I think that's an important part of it from a dependability standpoint. Resiliency, the infrastructure cannot go down because when you fail over to DR infrastructure, that's your primary data center. It cannot go down, and there is no backup for that. And then stringent RTOs and RPOs are essential. I think Zerto is one of the best solutions on the market to deliver you leading edge RPOs and RTOs to meet your enterprise needs. And then lastly, simplicity and efficiency. This is a DR infrastructure. It's not going to be used most of the time. So cost and complexity is extremely important. To minimize cost and complexity is a key factor. So how do you minimize the infrastructure footprint is a key consideration here. Using industry standard hardware, whether it's for a computer or for storage, can definitely help lower your cost. And then platform integrations with the hypervisor, with the software used for DR as well as applications is a key factor here to simplify how you execute your DR scenarios, right? So with that, hyperconverged infrastructure, it's a new breed of infrastructure, still evolving, but it has a great potential to serve as the ideal infrastructure for DR. So what's wrong with the traditional IT infrastructure, right? So one is it's extremely cumbersome to deploy. Most of these infrastructure paradigms were designed before there was any advent of virtualization. And we're still kind of using them, retrofitting them to use in the context of virtualization. They're cumbersome to deploy. They're expensive to administer. They need specialized skills. If you have an XYZ vendor SAN, you want to make sure that you have people who are skilled to administer that SAN. You have fiber channel switches. You need people who can manage those. And then they create silos of infrastructure, not necessarily vertical silos. They do create vertical silos, but horizontal silos too. Your compute is a discrete layer from your storage layer, and your storage area networking is a discrete layer as well. So all of it put together creates for very expensive and complex infrastructure, especially for DR. You want something simpler than that. Hyperconverged has a great potential to improve the agility of your infrastructure. Really, it uses the industry standard building blocks, right? So the cost of acquisition goes down with that. And then it has improved operational efficiency because it's an integrated platform. You have virtualization, you use industry standard hardware, there is no storage area networking to worry about. So all of those things put together give you a platform that you can modularly scale in a building blocks sort of fashion. So hyperconverged, if done right, could be a great infrastructure for DR. So Pivot 3, quick introduction. We really pride ourselves as the leaders in performance, scale, and efficiency. I'll show you quick proof points how we deliver these outcomes, but we deliver a lot better performance. And the flip side of performance is density, right? I mean, if you have more performance that you need, then you can increase the density and reduce the footprint. So performance has footprint implications as well. In terms of scale, we are built for scale. And the proof is that we have one of the largest HCI deployments in the world today. Something like 15 petabytes of data managed under our hyperconverged infrastructure. And we see that quite routinely. Storage efficiency. We deliver, with our erasure coding, we deliver market-leading efficiency that allows you to minimize the footprint. So we've been selling this VStack solution for quite a while in enterprise data centers. Really, this is the first generation HCI solution. All of the solutions on the market today, I believe, in my opinion, are first generation HCI solutions. They're really meant to address the initial HCI adoption. Really, they're ideal for single workload, single use case kind of model. Really, from Pivot 3 standpoint, in that we try to deliver performance, scale, and efficiency at the leading edge of the market there. But we have recently announced a new platform that builds on these features or these capabilities that the VStack platform has. We call it Acuity. Really what it does is it takes everything that VStack has. On top of that, it adds from the hardware standpoint, it adds NVMe flash, it adds quality of service, really designed to address mixed workload kind of conditions. And now why mixed workload is important for DR? DR by itself, when you fail over to DR, you're failing everything over to DR. It's by definition a mixed workload environment. So you need a platform that can handle those mixed workload situations really well. So Acuity is targeted at that kind of next wave of HCI adoption, really a platform that can consolidate mixed multiple workloads. At the heart of both of these platforms, Acuity as well as VStack, is our distributed scale-out architecture and our patented erasure coding. So what our distributed architecture does, and this is quite unique. I mean, many vendors may say they are distributed and they are scale-out, but they don't deliver what we deliver here, in the sense that we aggregate all resources across all of the nodes, right? So you can have 12 hybrid nodes or 16 all-flash nodes in one cluster, 144 drives. We aggregate all of those. We stripe our volumes across all of those drives. So every VM is spread across all of those drives. So whenever you're accessing data, whenever you're executing stuff in your VM, it's really being powered by all of those drives. So it gives you that massive performance in a consistent manner. We also aggregate bandwidth as well as cache. So as you add more nodes, because you need more compute storage, you're actually adding more, one, IOPS, and secondly, bandwidth and cache. So it's a really linearly scalable model that this scale-out architecture facilitates. Next, the critical component of our architecture is this erasure coding. And this really replaces those cross-node replication methods most other HCI vendors have. What they do is you have a 3-node cluster, they'll replicate everything from node 1 to node 2, node 2 to node 3, node 3 to node 1. So if one of the node goes down, they can still recover the data. Well, it works, but it's extremely inefficient because at the most you are 50% efficient. We use something called erasure coding, something that we've championed over many, many years, optimized over many, many years for performance, and we can deliver much higher performance, as you can see there. Erasure coding level 3, as well as erasure coding level 1, delivers quite a lot. And as your scale grows, your storage efficiency grows as well. And the flip side of that is, since you're writing less data to protect that data, you're saving a lot of write IOs that your applications can utilize for their performance needs. Both of our platform, Acuity as well as VStack, depend on these fundamental architectural capabilities. And then what Acuity adds to that is this multi-tier architecture. Really, I mean, we've taken, it's a multi-tier in the sense that we carve out a part of the RAM as a read cache. We have NVMe, PCIe NVMe tier that we use as cache as well as a persistent tier. And then we have either SSD or HDDs connected via SATA interface. So what is it doing, right? So first one is NVMe PCIe flash data path. Why would you need NVMe PCIe flash? If you think about it, traditionally we put SSDs or flash behind storage controllers. The storage controllers can be SATA or SAS. SAS is a little bit faster than SATA, But still, the bottleneck is the controller, not the drives. Those were designed for spinning media, which used to be slower media. And so the controllers were okay because the media was slower. Now your media is fast, media is not a bottleneck anymore, controllers become bottleneck. So NVMe allows you to really get around that bottleneck by placing your media right on the board in PCIe. So you get a far better, about 450% better performance with this. But that's just the hardware. Anybody can do that by just placing a card in a PCIe slot. What we do on top of that is what differentiates us. That's our secret sauce. So quality of service, priority-based data placement, policy-based quality of service, and schedulable policy of service, right? So you can categorize your workloads in either a mission-critical, business-critical, or non-critical. There are 5 levels that span across these 3 categories. You can classify them, and the system will take care of it. There are certain IOPS and latencies that we guarantee, and we'll make sure that you're depending on the tier that you choose or the policy that you choose, will meet them automatically. This technology is a little bit different than most quality of service that we're aware of. Most quality of service that we think of are sort of putting reservations or caps on resources. You're going to get so many number of IOPS are reserved for this class of workload, so nobody else can get that. That's the usual model of quality of service. But the way we do it is we prioritize. So you have a mission-critical, a business-critical, and non-critical workload. Your mission-critical workload is not always going to be consuming all of those resources. In those situations, we flexibly allow those resources to be utilized by business-critical or non-critical workloads. And so whenever the mission-critical workload needs those resources, we'll make sure that they have them for that workload. But we're not just sucking up those resources and reserving them even when the workload doesn't need that. Another thing that our platform does is the flexibility, and that's quite unique with Pivot 3 as well. Most HCI platforms, you have to scale in a similar building block, right? You have a compute and storage, and you have to scale compute storage every single time you add a block. In our case, you can scale compute only, you can scale storage only, as and when you need it. And in case of DR, I think it's an ideal use case where you would need that kind of functionality, right? You may not need a whole lot of compute, but you may need a whole lot of data. So at a certain point you think the compute is enough for me, I just need more data because I'm replicating a lot more, and there are more applications I'm migrating. You can just add data-only nodes. Cost optimized, costs a lot less, and it serves the need for the use case. And a quick overview, what can Pivot 3 do in terms of scale? You can put about 12 hybrid or 16 flash nodes in a cluster. At the maximum, you have so many resources, plenty of resources, and these will keep changing and growing as newer and newer hardware technologies come, right? As the CPUs get more powerful, as the RAMs, you can put more RAM in it, these will grow. But that's in one cluster or one what we call virtual performance group. You can put unlimited number of virtual performance groups in one cluster or one domain and manage them seamlessly from one single pane of glass. So whether you are designing a DR infrastructure for you as an enterprise, maybe you just need this. But if you're an MSP providing DR as a service, kind of cloud-based solution, you can grow it flexibly as and when needed while making sure it's simple and it's manageable. So with the introduction of our new Acuity platform, we've been talking to customers about how do you see this Acuity and VStack interacting in your data center. Most of our customers are saying, we have multiple sites. We have, we don't have only Pivot 3, we still have legacy hardware, and we want a platform that can interact with that legacy hardware, which is here up top. What we may need in our production data centers is what you see up there, HCI-A, those are the accelerator nodes with NVMe, that's the Acuity platform. So we may want to put Acuity in our production data centers, and we may want to use VStack in our DR site. And as we have more and more data that we are protecting, we will simply add more data-only nodes. And as and when needed, we can add compute if you want to. It will also facilitate that cloud connectivity using Zerto's Cloud Connect capabilities. So Zerto is really instrumental here in making sure all sorts of DR scenarios are addressed. The one thing I want to emphasize is we believe we are a hyper-converged infrastructure company, and that's what our focus should be. And that's where we try to excel performance, scale, and efficiency. We are laser focused on that. And we rely on partners like Zerto to provide the specific functionalities needed for specific use cases. As an MSP, you can grow the similar model if you're an MSP by scaling the infrastructure in steps as and when you need it. And then there is a role for those accelerator nodes with NVMe Acuity, NVMe Flash, for you as an MSP as well. So for example, if you're an MSP providing DR as a service, with these quality of service features, you can start promising certain SLAs or guaranteeing certain SLAs for few key applications that your customer is backing up. Your customer may be backing up a whole bunch of stuff or replicating a whole bunch of stuff to you, and customers may say, hey, these 3 applications are the ones that matter to me the most. The performance needs to be uncompromised on these 3 applications. I don't really care about these 15. So you can tag those applications, those VMs, as mission critical and guarantee the performance, create tremendous value for your customer. Even when they are in failover mode, they're still guaranteed the performance SLAs, and in the process, capture part of that value for you as an MSP. So that's really, the quick product introduction, what product does and what the terminologies are. We're going to move on to the panel discussion, but before that, if you have any questions about the platform, I'll take it now.
Quick question about the host size that you have, the cluster size. So 16 hosts is like the maximum.
In one virtual performance group, you can have 16 flash nodes.
Okay.
Yeah.
The question is, the 1.4 petabyte that we saw up there, is that for hybrid? What would be the total raw space for an all SSD configuration, 16 hosts?
What's our largest drive size? Okay. Yeah, we'll get the answer. What you saw, the numbers were for hybrid. In hybrid, we essentially, you have 12 drives, you have 12 nodes in a hybrid, you have 144 drives. That gives you about that much capacity raw.
That was a 12-node hybrid.
Yes, but the flashes, most flashes are 8 drives, right? So we can put 16 flash nodes in a cluster.
480 terabytes.
Well, half a petabyte. So if you use the most advanced erasure encoding that we saw up there, figured with backnapping map, 94% of 400 terabytes might be what you could use.
That's the most efficient erasure coding, EC1, yes.
Yep.
In a fully populated cluster.
460.
60 nodes.
60 nodes.
So just to clarify, because everybody calls everything the same, so from a VMware cluster perspective, we could support a VMware cluster that's larger than 16 nodes.
Mm-hmm.
We just carve it up on the storage side based on our performance groups, which are dictated on number of drives and testing where we found that there's a cliff at a certain level of drives. We're adding more I/O doesn't necessarily give you more performance. So we cap it at 144 because that gives us the best throughput. On the flash side, that's not necessarily the case. It's a more of a development decision that was made. It's not necessarily technical. That flash cluster may grow in the future to actually mirror a VMware cluster size.
All right. Yep.
What's the connectivity requirements between the nodes?
The nodes are connected with 2 10 gig links. Every node contributes 10 gig bandwidth to the SAN.
Okay, so you need some kind of 10 gig switching on the back end.
Yeah, 2 of those. Yeah?
How do you handle encryption
Encryption
at rest?
address. So encryption address, we partner with, just like how we handle the DR situations with the best of the breed solutions. We partner with partners like Hytrust for those kind of situations, not only for encryption, but also for geofencing, multi-tenancy, those kind of activities. Any more questions?
The management interface for I'll call it VSAN, for your VSAN at the 16-node storage domain, what serves up that management UI to manage the storage in there, or is it sort of plugging into VSAN?
There is a native management UI that you can use, but there's a vSAN plugin that does everything that the native UI does. All right, so let's move on to panel. So this is our panel. I'm going to ask the guests to introduce themselves. Steve, let's start with you.
Sure. I'm Steve Hyatt. I'm the Vice President of Sales at Stage 2 Data, and we're a VAR, CSP, and MSP based in Ontario, just outside in the GTA.
Dean?
I'm Dean LeClaire, Director of Emerging Technologies at Walle Computer Associates. We're a 38-year-old VAR based here in Massachusetts and provide integration services and data center consulting to about 5,000 clients here in New England.
And I'm Shannon Snowden with Zerto. I'm a Senior Technical Architect, work with Technology Alliances.
And I'm Carlos Fonseca. I'm a senior solutions architect with Pivot 3.
So, Steve, why don't you talk a little bit about
Sure.
what you do?
So Stage 2 Data, we've been around since 2008. We have a customer base that ranges through Canada, Midwestern US, and we actually serve quite a few companies down in the Caribbean. Now, we are VAR, CSP, and MSP. So what we do with our customers is obviously we work with Zerto, selling it as a one-time solution. We provide it as a service. And with Pivot 3, we're a partner for them for enterprise. We also recently replaced our entire DR infrastructure with Pivot 3. So our cloud environment now is completely hyper-converged. And we have a special focus with customers who are hybrid, so people who have distributed workloads in AWS or Azure, and looking at ways of interconnecting that all with the networking and making it work seamlessly from a data protection standpoint.
Awesome, thank you. Dean?
Yeah, so like I said, Walle Computer is a privately owned company formed about 38 years ago by John Walle. We evolved from being a PC company here in New England to having clients that we serve, like EMC. If anybody's familiar with EMC, Avamar, or Iron Mountain's products, Walle was actually the OEM for those products for many years. So we evolved from being just a family business doing PC deployments for education and corporate into more of a data center company. So today we work with large OEM partners like Dell and Lenovo, and work in the storage space with partners like Pivot 3. And our main thing is we try to be client driven, vendor agnostic. So our big thing is bringing the best of breed products from a solution set, and as an integrator and a partner to tie all those pieces together. So obviously, the partners that we're here with today, we consider best in breed in that space. We do, from a reseller perspective, work with companies to provide cloud and DR as a service. And obviously, that's all driven by Zerto and other solutions.
Awesome, and we don't need an introduction for Zerto.
You may have heard of
We're at
Zerto, I
ZertoCon.
don't know.
All right, so Dean, maybe you've been in the business for a while, and you've seen how things and landscape has evolved over time, not only for DR, but for everything else. But in the context of DR, would you help us understand what's happened over time in terms of your customer priorities and expectations and the technology that's driving those changes?
Sure. I think from our perspective, obviously DR is top of mind, over the last several years, and it's evolving every day in terms of what the requirements are. The keynote yesterday, I think, hit on a lot of global drivers around disaster recovery. From our perspective, what we're seeing from a trends standpoint is, HCI is being driven just from a technology standpoint. With what Intel's done with CPUs over the last few years, what companies are doing with SSD and NVMe. From a trending standpoint, we're certainly seeing that the focus is on not necessarily the hardware anymore. The focus is on what can I do with that hardware, software-defined X, right? So in the data center space, where infrastructure as a service, DR as a service, from a DR perspective, now people are looking to tie in, how can I bring that multi-tenant workload? How can I, deal with not only my server infrastructure, but dealing with protecting my desktop? So what we're seeing as it relates directly to DR and hyperconverged is we're seeing people looking at the idea of hyperconverged as getting the best of breed from a commodity servers perspective, like taking commodity hardware and building a DR strategy around that. And what we're also seeing is we're now seeing customers using DR as kind of their own test bed for how do they move their infrastructure into their next generation. So it might be cloud, it might be on-premise, certainly hyperconverged. We're seeing all of our data center partners certainly adopting hyperconverged as they build out their cloud backend. So I think just what hyperconverged is driving around commodity and what companies like Zerto being best at what they do in DR and Pivot 3 being best at what they do in storage efficiency, allowing, clients and vendors like us and Scott to be your trusted advisor and help you tie that all together.
Awesome. Now, Steve, anything to add there? Especially, you've been in DR as a service business, relatively for a long time compared to, most other vendors who are doing it now.
Yep.
What do you think? I mean, add to what Dean says, but also, from DR as a service, what do you see in terms of when customers decide to do it themselves, on-prem versus DR as a service? What are the drivers?
Well, I found the biggest driver for us recently is companies are willing to lower their overall TCO for running the secondary site. So those type of organizations that are coming to us for that are looking for ease of use and the lower cost. And when you look at hyperconvergence, even in the primary data center, someone who's looking for that driver to drop their DR site is a very good candidate, or should really be looking at that for the primary site as well.
Okay, all right. And Shannon, as you see from the product standpoint, right? You've been at Zerto for quite some time too.
Yeah.
So you've seen how Zerto's changed over time. How do you think the changes or the improvements in the technology that Zerto has made is sort of driving what customers expect and are able to do?
Yeah, so I do have a historical perspective from the Zerto point of view. So I looked at your imperatives for DR, and since the product's been out since 2011, if you looked at those imperatives, a lot of those are kind of dreamy as far as low RTO, RPO, flexibility, scalability, and particularly going across platforms. And I think with a sense of pride, we've sort of driven that from a dream to expectations now that it's real. So Dean and Steve can go and confidently be able to offer services and solutions to customers, knowing that, yeah, we can really pull this off. Because that's one of the things that most all of our customers tell us, you kind of do what you say you can do. And so that gives you a sense of confidence. And I know early on in the product, less than a year old, we went to a multi-tenant native capability, which we learned a lot early on as far as the APIs and the reporting capability, but that turned us very quickly from a point solution to the beginnings of a platform. And we saw that today in the keynote, that Zerto is rapidly becoming an enablement platform for all kinds of solutions, including, for you're able to discuss seriously about, we don't care what your footprint looks like, what combination of our products that you want to use, we'll enable that. Even if you want to take a part of it and go to AWS or Azure, we can support that as well. So it's becoming much more of a platform than a point solution message.
Now, you mentioned AWS and Azure. What are you seeing, the trends there? I mean, what's driving customers to go into those public clouds?
Well, I did the session yesterday with Andy and Jamie on two of our customers who are, living that life now of going from data center managers to more of seeing themselves as some sort of hybrid software, provisioner, and trying to pick the best solutions for what stays on premise. They have to be very efficient, and that's where HCI comes in, obviously, to where they can be efficient there with the footprint and the consumption. Yeah. But then also, there is a directive to have some sort of cloud solution. That's where you get into, you want to not have to reinvent the wheel every time that you acquire someone or you're acquired or whatever, to be able to accomplish that and be very flexible, but keep your DR stable and predictable.
Awesome. Carlos, anything to add there, especially from HCI standpoint, when you go out in the field, what do you see when customers think of HCI and DR?
Yeah, to expand on Shannon's point, I mean, before my tenure here and my tenure at VMware, I was at VMware for a long time. I was VP of infrastructure for a defense contracting company, and we were large. We had a $1.2 billion run rate, so I had a pretty good budget for IT, and I was able to hire pretty intelligent individuals in my team. And having said that, for 9 consecutive years, I'd never actually successfully had a DR test. I could just never get it to work, and it wasn't until I virtualized my infrastructure that I was able to actually successfully have a DR play. What what products like Zerto do is they take all the complexity in all the moving parts that are DR, and they bring it together in a more consumable fashion to give you the ability for that predictability for success. If you look at Pivot 3 on the HCI side, we're doing the same thing from an infrastructure perspective. You know, we don't sell boxes, we sell a platform. We don't look at our, you know, when you look at this from a consumption perspective, the virtual machines can leverage everything on our platform to run your workloads. The simplicity of architecture, of deployment, management, and scale for us is the infrastructure side of what Zerto brings to DR. You know, if you have a DR site and you have to figure it out, and you have to have all these moving parts, or you have an HCI platform that, you know, simplicity isn't equal. So, you know, anything is going to be more simple than the legacy stack, but when you stack the HCI players together, they're not all the same. So we try to bring that same consumption model on the infrastructure side and the ease of use that like a Zerto brings to you from a peace of mind on the DR side.
Awesome. Thank you. Now, Steve and Dean, both of you, when you're thinking about DR infrastructure, whether it's in your cloud or on-prem with your customer, what are your critical considerations from infrastructure, not only hardware infrastructure, but also software infrastructure?
Well, for us personally, I mean, the reason why we made the switch in moving completely to hyperconvergence on the DR infrastructure side is dominantly a lot of the businesses we used to work with Flash being so predominant out there now, most people's mission critical workloads are sitting in Flash. As a DR provider, that can provide a bit of a problem because depending on how we've built out our infrastructure, it's not all Flash. So when somebody, for instance, fails over, how are we guaranteeing where those virtual machines are going to arrive? One of the interesting things, or the dirty little secret about DR as a service, is oversubscription. So the reason that cloud service provider is making any money is because that infrastructure is oversubscribed. Now, it's a question that not many people know to ask or even bother asking. So, for instance, with Zerto, with it being able to do the bubble test that you're able to run, we'll actually look at regions and do an isolated failover, and we'll see what happens when we do start failing over different individual regions. Now, with the Acuity release, which is what we're so excited for, is we can actually, even if the customer doesn't have Pivot 3 in their side, because we have the dynamic QoS on our side, we're actually able to go in by region and define what is mission critical for these organizations. So if we do encounter a large regional outage, we can actually guarantee that there is going to be the resources available to the machines that are mission critical are going to need it. And as from an MSP perspective, we're able to bill more for that, and it completely changes the way we've architected our DR. So we look at things from a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 perspective, and we can actually guarantee it, because I've heard stories of if a full region does go down, that's a lot of load on some systems.
Yeah, that's one thing most people don't realize, right? When there's a natural disaster or catastrophe,
Absolutely.
It's not only your company who's trying to access that DR cloud, it's all of those companies in that region trying to do that, and oversubscribed infrastructure can be a problem then.
Yeah, if you ask a cloud provider that question, they're probably going to quiver.
Yeah. What about you, Dean?
Yeah, and I think from our perspective, things have changed and evolved from a standpoint of if we go back to the platform conversation, as a system integrator, we're able to kind of define some things as a given. So, we're not walking into clients and starting at ground zero in a lot of cases. We're able to take what Zerto has and either clients that have already made that decision and that's their platform of choice. Now we're able to go in and focus on, not, whose point hardware solution do you have in your production site, so how do we have to mirror that in the DR site? We're now able to look at cloud as a viable DR solution, and as the cloud solution providers simplify that even more for us, and Pivot 3 simplifies what we might want to do on-prem, now we're able to move that conversation into all the other business drivers around DR. So, people might have been focused on how do I recover my ERP system? How do I recover my communication systems? Now we're moving into some of those secondary and tertiary conversations around, the user side of the community. What am I going to do with 200 or 300 desktops? And I think we touched on it, the multi or the mixed workload inside DR. So now we're able to take the server side of it and kind of check a box and say that's taken care of. Zerto's scripted that for us, orchestrated that for us. Our cloud has orchestrated it on the back end. Now we're able to move into the business and say, okay, now that you have a data center that's operational, how are your users going to get to it? What else do your users have to connect to? You know, public safety, you got radios, you got dispatch, you know, you might have WAN circuits, you know, software-defined, you know, WAN is now taking over. So what Hyperconverged and Zerto have allowed us to do is really become more of a business advisor and help them cover all the other parts of their business instead of a speeds and feeds conversation around what's it going to cost me to get 10 terabytes and what's the IOPS around flash versus NVMe. We're eliminating that from a lot of the conversation, and we're moving into more relevant business conversations that the company can put a dollar figure on. You know, we always would try to simplify it, you know, to things like car insurance and, you know, do you have collision on your car? You know, do you have run flat tires? No, what happens? You get a flat, you got to pull over, you got to change a tire. Well, you know, I guarantee, you know, all our CEOs aren't running around, you know, worried about what they're going to do when they get a fat tire or something like that. So, you know, we're now moving the conversation into more business-related, you know, pieces.
You had something to add, Carlos?
Feel free. Well, one thing I could add to that too is the biggest change I've seen recently is because organizations are becoming hybrid, is now those workloads are moving to AWS, they're moving to Azure. Most people are running some type of legacy backup technology that, yes, they could go run it up in the cloud. What is the cost and how clunky is that going to be? Or you can go with those cloud providers and use what native technology they give you. So we end up going into different environments and they're running one solution locally. They have a different solution sitting in Azure and another one in AWS. So now your team is spread thin managing those things. So something like Zerto, for instance, for us, is now we're starting to talk about being cloud redundant from a provider perspective. So moving away from putting all your eggs in one basket with one cloud provider, and now being a cloud provider protecting another cloud provider. So, you know, that's the most beautiful thing in the direction I really see us heading in.
Okay, awesome.
And the one thing that I'm listening that I guess, you know, for everyone in the audience, that it might not be as clear for you guys as it is for the people in the panel. When we talk about Acuity and we talk about NVMe RAM, you know, pretty soon you're going to see everyone in the market come out with an NVMe RAM tier of storage for their hyperconvergence play. You know, the thing with Pivot 3 that's really going to differentiating us from everyone else is, so it's a couple things. You know, if you create an NVMe tier and then you have an SSD tier and a magnetic disk tier, you still have to do a lot of planning and make a lot of decisions. So if I'm an MSP, I have to re-architect things on occasion. Pivot 3's NVMe RAM is bundled with our quality of service capability, which is two things. The first thing is it's real time. So you need it, you get it based on the policies and service levels that you define. And more importantly, having not only ran IT, but spent 8 years at VMware, I talked to a multitude of customers. You know, even when you talk to the smartest customers that really think they know their applications, when you peel the onion back and ask them, what does your application actually need to run? Well, it's a you know, latency sensitive app. Great, what does that mean? Is that 30 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds? What does that mean to you? How do I configure the app? And the reality is sometimes not only the customer doesn't know it, but when you call the vendor of those applications, they don't know it. And from Pivot 3 simplicity perspective, right? You know, our legacy is, we've been doing this for a long time in the surveillance space. We're the #1 surveillance HCI SAN in the world. That business is not run by IT guys. It's run by military guys, law enforcement guys, and they know how to do security, but they don't understand IT. So we had to build simplicity into our platform. You fast forward to Acuity, you know, we give you the ability to create these policies. If you have a latency sensitive app, you put it into a latency sensitive category. You don't define whether it's 30 milliseconds or 100 milliseconds. You just define that it's latency sensitive or IO sensitive, bandwidth sensitive, throughput sensitive. We do all the smart decisions in the background to make sure that those virtual machines get the resources that they need to run. So if you're an ISP, MSP, and you know you have thousands of virtual machines, you want to be able to put things in buckets and know that that platform is going to be able to handle those workloads without you having to go in there constantly and turning the knobs, right? At home, I turn the radio on, I get great sound. This guy has 5,000 knobs for my scratchy voice to come out through this microphone, right? Way too much effort. I'd rather just be able to flick a switch and get great sound, right? So it's kind of like that's what we bring to the market. Our Acuity product is not this like you homegrown tiered approach. It's leveraging these tiers where the software makes sure that your applications are running as they need it.
Yeah, so you can essentially assign the policies for your workloads that are aligned with your business goals, right? So you don't know latency and throughput and IOPS is not a business goal. This is a mission critical application. This is a business critical application. That's a business goal. And so that helps you, align your IT policies with the business objectives you're trying to meet. Shannon, you have anything to add here?
Yeah, I was just recalling what we were talking about before the session, where most of your early on admins carry guns. So, so if things don't work, to shoot the service. So you really want to make sure you got the DR plan for that. That's off premise, right?
Absolutely.
And I think when you just talk about workloads, so much emphasis now, and there's probably another 5-day seminar around containers and what's happening with object storage. And now, data center companies being handed, packaged 100 VMs inside of a container. So, it's not as simple as it was, 2 months ago, 6 months ago. The workloads that are being driven around, applications like Docker and these kind of things, it's a different world.
Yeah.
And you can't use the same buttons that you had, a couple years ago. We're not walking up to our Harman Kardon amps anymore and adjusting our treble, So.
I still do that.
Yeah. I learned I'm the old guy on the panel today, so.
All right, so I want to give a few minutes for you guys to ask any questions you may have. But looking at what we're bringing to the market in terms of future, what Zerto is bringing to the market in terms of future, where VMware is going with their roadmap, how do you think your business evolving, both Steve and Dean?
I think for us, we've always feel like, we have a couple sayings. We're a family business, so we have a million corny slogans. We've printed them on T-shirts. So, I think for us, some of our emphasis is, we're here in New England, right? So we probably all know who the Patriots are. Bill Belichick's thing is just do your job. So for us, it's define that job, stay in that swim lane, and do what you do and do it great. So for us, we're trying to really partner up with people that's the same mindset. We're not looking for the next hyperconverged company that's going to tell us that they've got a better hypervisor. Mm-hmm. They've got a cheaper hypervisor. We're all pretty comfortable with, the top 2 hypervisors that we probably see in our space, and it's probably debatable that you can even say there's 2. But, so from that standpoint, we look at our business as, trying to focus while we also support our clients' drivers around commodity, technologies and simplifying things. So many of our customers today versus 5 years ago, there's not a lot of people running around LinkedIn saying they're a SAN administrator. People aren't going to look and hire SAN administrators anymore. So we're seeing that, being able to focus, but being able to focus within best-of-breed solutions, and that's really, what we're seeing, Pivot 3 and Zerto, and you guys giving us the flexibility to work with, multiple OEMs. And we're then seeing the other side of that where, larger companies are just going out and acquiring something and trying to figure out how to put it into their portfolio. And, I can think of 2 or 3 of the major players in the industry right now where I don't even know what their hyperconverged strategy is because they own 4. So, what's their focus? And, I, harken back because I'm the old guy now. You ask a lot of people what hyperconverged is, their first answer probably is 2 U4 nodes. Everybody thinks a hyperconverged is 2 U4 nodes. Oh, you mean there's other ways to build hyperconverged that's not 2 U4 nodes? So that's what we're also seeing in the trend is, yeah, there are some great things happening with some of the acquisitions and what Dell and Lenovo and HP are doing on the commodity server side. So that's kind of where I think, we're able to become that trusted advisor focus on the business, focus on the applications, and a lot of times we like to call ourselves the plumber, but we feel like you guys already have that covered for us.
Awesome. By the way, we do support 2U4 node also, among many other form factors. All right, Steve?
I think for me, the biggest thing that I've been seeing or coming in the future is the word simplicity. We keep talking about Zerto, it's simple. We're talking about the setup of Pivot 3, it's simple. This word for us, why does somebody want to do DR as a service? Well, because it's simpler. So why are people moving workloads into AWS and Azure? It's the same reason, it's easier. So from a data protection standpoint, which a lot of our focus is on, is we want people to be able to distribute those workloads, not worry about where they go, and maintain that word of simplicity. So it doesn't matter where you put it, we're going to find a solution that's simple.
Yes.
And just like yourself, and link it all together. So that for us is that we need to maintain simple.
Pretty much the vision that was painted in yesterday's keynote.
Yeah.
And I think if I could just add one more local reference to that, our good buddy Mr. Belichick's big thing is accountability. So not only is it simple, but we've got to have the accountability for that's what we're accountable for. We're not trying to be over here or over here. I know this is what I've got Zerto for. I know this is what I've got my cloud provider for, and this is what I've got my HCI for.
Awesome.
And from an accountability perspective, ask from pure HCI perspective, Pivot 3 invested in OEMs with VMware. It's money that we're spending so that we can be accountable to not point fingers when there's an issue. We don't say, well, it's not the hardware, call VMware. I mean, we invest in taking accountability and making sure that you have one throat to choke. It's not a marketing slogan. You actually barely see it in our literature. But that's the reason that, VMware and Pivot 3 have been walking lockstep since 2006. It's an investment in making sure that, there's no finger pointing, so your apps are up and running when you need them, and you have the support from a partner. We see ourselves as your partner, not just a vendor that's selling you technology.
You have anything, Shannon?
Yeah, and for us, going back to the historical perspective and sort of leading a lot of the features now that are present, I think you'll see in the product of Zerto going forward, we're going to keep adding really cool and enabling features as a platform to where it just keeps giving you guys the ability to, once again, offer more services, be aware of what the business needs, be able to beat it better. And so I know some of the roadmap things that are coming along, so there's still cool stuff coming.
All right. Any questions in the audience? No? No. All right, go on.
Question for Pivot 3. So other players in the marketplace, I'll name a couple, vSAN, Nutanix, direct competitors of yours, no doubt. What would you say is one thing that would differentiate your product offering you from some of the other guys in the marketplace?
Sure. I mean, not necessarily in order of priority, but from a simplicity perspective, right? When you look at the life cycle of your platform from initial architecture discussions and design to deployment to maintenance to end of life, you're going to notice that for Pivot 3, we've built the simplicity into the platform, but we're not taking away the flexibility. So you don't have to think too much about taking a 16-node cluster. You basically put it together and stand it up. But that doesn't mean that everything on that cluster is quote unquote, we have different terminology, but for simplicity's sense is RAID 5 or RAID 6. You can pick whatever performance, capacity, or resiliency levels you want in your data stores or LUNs. When it comes to performance on the platform, from a usability perspective, we have the ability to run really high-end workloads. So HCI right now, you architect silos because what you do for VDI is very different than what you do for a SQL database or a general IT platform. With Pivot 3, you basically can architect one infrastructure and leverage it whichever way you want, because we can run the smallest virtual machine to a high-end, heavy-duty messaging or SQL platform, which our competition cannot. I mean, that's some of them. That's some of the aspects. And, we look at everything from a VM perspective, right? So if you bought 16 nodes, you theoretically could create a single SQL box that took up 480 terabytes of storage, and it would be no different than, you know, if you had a single node with 480 terabytes of storage. I mean, we give you aggregation of resources across the platform. So, you know, I haven't lost a POC to any of those names based on pure merit. I mean, I lose deals all day long based on relationship because people buy from people. You know, I live in New Hampshire. I buy my cars in Braintree. You know, go figure. There's 54 dealers before I get to Braintree, but I like that guy. So, I mean, you know, but on a pure paper pros and cons perspective, I have not lost a single POC to the competition.
I think I could add to that as well, considering since we went through the process of picking a hyperconverged vendor for our cloud, we were sitting on the back end being sold. And when the different messaging we heard from these organizations, one of the big drivers for Pivot 3 from us was it was very clear. We're hyperconverged infrastructure, it's VMware, that's it. They weren't trying to sell me on a different hypervisor. They weren't saying, well, we do replication too, it'll lower your cost of ownership. It was such a clear direction for us, and we came up with a slogan that some hyperconverged vendors will tell you it can do everything. So if you use one solution to run everything, it takes one solution to bring everything down. So for us, you know, Pivot 3 became a clear choice for that reason.
Steve, what were the drivers behind the switch from legacy to hyperconverged, and how can just give me the top one or two, and then
Yep.
what did you use as the top one or two for your ROI for doing that?
So for us, the issue was the evolution. So we have customers of the size companies we work with. So we work with, in Canada, we have a relationship with the Canadian Bar Association. So we're promoted to every single law firm across all of Canada. Now, that means we're working with places that have 20 employees. There's also law firms that have thousands of employees, and the workload differences were huge. So what we had happening was, as a cloud provider, it's hard to predict your growth. It's hard to predict. If we go out and we built out an all-flash infrastructure and no one came, we just wasted a lot of money. So for us, the biggest drivers was going to be the scalability. And even since we put in our node, you can add compute or you can add storage. So I don't know who's going to be coming under the Stage 2 data umbrella and what workloads they're going to bring with them. Some people need lots of storage, some people need lots of compute. And it's impossible to really plan that. So our biggest thing was the flexibility of deployment. I mean, to put this in perspective, before when we did a deployment, we were taking down our infrastructure. Our senior engineers would be in the data center for days. It was a drawn out, long process. Now when we need to expand, it's just simply drop a node. Our level 1 techs can do it. So it's really freed up time and resources and just made us agile. I don't need to predict 2 years out of my infrastructure when I build it. I can do it in a 6-month cycle now.
Any other questions?
One last one for you, Steve. So, question about, you guys are here as a service, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious. So, one of the things that we're working with Zerto, right?
Yep.
Some of the bidirectional targeting you can do now, the multi-target, some of the new stuff, opens up very interesting possibilities for products, right? Not just for relocating to various targets for cloud relocation, but in the backup space as well. One of the things that we're thinking about is the way that the product works, the way Zerto works with the journal, right? And the VRA has to compress, right, the journal, read it back out, uncompress it, then write it back a second time to recovery volume. We size the peak, and you know the 60-second RPO that we see in that beautiful HTML5 form.
Yep.
We aim to have that at scale, right, all the time. And we try to size our highways appropriately to maintain that. When you're selling that to the customer, how do you do that and make it cost effective? Because to keep 60-second RPO, how can you ever sell a customer 60-second RPO? Their right IO could change, right? And then I'm just asking, how is that even possible?
So we're not selling based on the RPO, right? So, you know, when we're talking with the customer, we're going to, because we have customers, I'll give you an example. So we work with, because of Zerto specifically, there's a whole bunch of banks in the Caribbean we do work with. Now, they don't want us to put their data in the US, they're more than willing to come to Canada. So with Zerto, for instance, we're actually able to put Zerto on workloads sitting in the Caribbean and protect them back to Ontario. So we see fluctuations in there like crazy. And that's just a natural progression. We see it all day long with our customers. So when we're speaking with them, we're not selling them based on the RPOs. We're going to say you're going to have a general range and that we're looking to get to. But the truth is, even if you hit 60 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, you're still far superior than anyone else.
Oh, yeah, I'm not arguing.
Yeah, so we base it on the type of the SLA. So the SLA is going to be 4 hours, 12, or 24, and that's the way we look at it.
All right. Seems like no more questions. I appreciate your time here. Thanks for listening to us, and have a great time. We
Thank you
are
for your
also
time.
here.
Thank you.
Meet us at the booth if you have any questions. Thank you.